Hello, everybody. Welcome to our last webinar of 2015 about best practices in remote design. And I'm Mariano Suarez Batan. I'm the CEO of Mural. I was your host 7 months ago when we started this series on webinars around the best practices in remote design, experience mapping, scaling design cultures. And again, we'll keep on doing them in 2016. We are going to bring a lot of other hosts, and today again I'm glad to bring Jim back. We've learned a lot in this year, a lot from the people speaking at the event, and he's been collecting and upgrading our best practice playbook. And today, with the hashtag remote design, we're going to have a conversation. And first, Jim, we're going to be sharing a little bit more about what you can bring into your toolbox, into your method for 2016, and hopefully you can bring in a bunch of ideas to improve how you guys work. So remember, at Mural is where we are tweeting. Hashtag remote design is where we're going to be following the hashtag. And again, Jim, please go ahead and take it from here. And we'll be back towards the end with a Q&A. We'll be collecting all your questions from the Q&A pane in the webinar software. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mariano. Yeah, it's great to be back talking about one of my favorite topics, remote design. My name is Jim Caldback. I'm the head of customer success at Mural. I'm the author of the book Designing Web Navigation, which came out in 2007, and I'm currently publishing my second book with O'Reilly called Mapping Experiences, and that should be out at the beginning of 2016. And I have some case studies and examples there on how to do experience mapping online using tools like Mural and other tools as well too. I have a background in UX design. I've been doing it for about 18 years, and I've been doing a lot of that from remote locations. So I've worked from my home office and remote locations for a lot of that time. So I have experience in design disciplines, creative disciplines, and I've also confronted a lot of the challenges of remote designs, and I'm happy to share some of the findings of our research and some of our observations with you today in our webinar. And here's what we're going to talk about. I think it's difficult to talk about remote design without talking about remote work in general. The two overlap. In fact, a lot of the recommendations that I'm going to give today are really about remote work in general, but I'm going to be looking at remote work through the lens of remote design. I'll have some specific points about remote design, but we'll be talking kind of about the two at the same time. So I wanted to say a few words about remote work in general. And then based on our research and observations, I want to share with you the 5 best practices that we've come up with. I'll have an example for each, and then some specific tips that you can hopefully use right at work immediately. And at the end, as Mariano said, we'll take some questions, so please use the questions pane on your webinar software. So let's get into it. Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, once said, "Why is it every time I ask for a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached?" And that was at the turn of the 20th century, just about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago. And at the time, the concept of work was mostly about manual labor, that most people who were employed worked in the factory. And in this case, he was kind of lamenting the fact that he really just wanted people to assemble his cars, and he didn't want to have them think or have all of the emotions or aspects that come with a brain or with a human being. He just wanted people to assemble things, and work was really about punching a time clock at 9 o'clock in the morning, going to work, and then punching out at the end of the day. And only a very few people actually worked with information. That was kind of top management. But the notion of work was a place that you went and worked with your hands, and he really just wanted hired hands. Of course, that changed. About 50 years later, Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, recognized that there was a whole class of workers emerging that worked predominantly with information. And he said, this was his prediction, that the most valuable asset of the 21st century institution will be knowledge workers and their productivity. And with that, he coined the term knowledge workers, which are, again, this class of worker that works predominantly with information. So we've kind of moved from hired hands to hired minds, from manual labor to kind of cognitive labor or knowledge workers. And with the the digital technology and the internet, once we're talking about working with information rather than working in a factory, then work can happen anywhere, right? So the idea of remote design starts to emerge. Remote work isn't a new concept. At the end of the 60s, there were some experiments and writings on remote work, and in the early 70s as well too. But it's really in the past 5 or so years that we've seen a real explosion in remote work. And to some degree, this has to do with the tools and technology that's available, but also the nature of our companies. We're working more globally. We work with distributed teams. So this concept of remote work, we find it in literature. There are full-length books written about remote work. There are newspaper articles and magazines. There are websites that deal with this topic. There's websites that help you find remote jobs. So the idea of remote work is very prevalent, and all indications say that that's going to increase. That's only going to increase. So remote work is here to stay and will be increasing. And I think for designers, that presents some unique challenges, because our work tends to be visual. It tends to be collaborative. It's about making decisions together and getting consensus with stakeholders and your team. So I think when we talk about remote work, and then within that, remote design, there are some unique challenges for remote design that we need to understand. And that's what we did with some original research. So about 4 months ago, we launched a survey on remote design. And we surveyed about 275 designers from around the world. These were mostly digital product designers, UX designers, interaction designers, and the like. And they came from different industries and different size companies. But I wanted to highlight 2 points out of that survey, two figures that came out of that survey, to kind of show a little bit around the state of remote design. One of the questions we asked was how often or how frequent designers are engaged with remote teams, that how often they have to collaborate, either that they're remote or that a member of their team is remote, and how often that situation arises. And about 2/3 of them said on most or all of their projects, they have some remote component that they have to deal with. Only 2% actually said never. So to varying degrees, remote design is very prevalent amongst designers. We can kind of assume that at some point in time, you're going to be confronted with remote design. So it's universal. And again, the trend really only points towards an increased frequency of remote design. Another question we asked, though, was around the quality of work. So we asked how designers felt that the quality of their work, did it increase or did it decrease when they were working in remote conditions compared to when they were co-located or working face-to-face. And about half of them said that the quality of their work, that they felt that the quality of their work decreased when they were in those remote situations. So this is a problem. And it's not necessarily a matter of preference, and it's not necessarily a matter of avoiding remote work, because as I mentioned, that's only increasing, and the nature of our teams and our organizations will be more and more remote in the future. So it's really about how are we going to, kind of as a discipline, as a community, how are we going to ensure that we can continue to deliver a high quality of work even when we're designing remotely. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today. The 5 best practices that we were able to identify. Also on the survey, we had an open-ended question where we asked those designers, those 275 designers, what advice would they give to other designers on how to collaborate remotely. And based on that and our observations, we were able to come up with 5 best practices. So for each, I'm going to talk about it a little bit, and then give an example, and then give you 3 tips that you can take with you and use immediately on the job. So the first best practice that we identified was to meet in person. Now, this might sound counterintuitive. Here I'm talking about remote work and remote design, and the first thing I say is to meet in person. And I'm not suggesting to be co-located the whole time, because that's kind of not the point of the situation in reality. But I think meeting in person goes a long way for future effective remote collaboration. So you gain different cues and a different sense of the team and the personalities and the characters involved in that team when you meet in person. That our communication is much more fluid, and we understand how people can communicate, and that helps us interpret messages later on. And I have found that meeting in person at least once, particularly up front in an initiative or an effort, goes a long way to effective collaboration later on. And this is what we see Scott Berkun talking about in his book, The Year Without Pants. By the way, super good book. I highly recommend it. He's a really good writer, and he talks about his year working at WordPress.com. So WordPress.com is a completely remote company. They have 300 or more employees, but they don't have an office. So they have always been remote, and they continue to be remote without an office. And in this book, he talks about the culture and the tools and how they work together. So there's just a ton of advice and practical information in this book. But he also talks about their yearly meeting, that they do meet once a year. They go to some exotic location around the world, and they meet face-to-face. And Scott told me in a recent interview that face-to-face interaction gives you more information about the people that you're dealing with. And then when you are communicating with them remotely, you're able to interpret their messages and read between the lines in a different way. So for them, a yearly face-to-face meeting is still part of their remote culture, right? So don't count that out. So the three things that I want to suggest that you can do is to plan in-person kickoffs. So again, at the beginning of a project or initiative, I think it's really important to meet in person, and often a kickoff meeting where you're setting up a project, talking about the deliverables, how you're going to work together, roles and responsibilities. You might even do some of that design work initially, but plan that kickoff so that it's actually a reason to travel and go and meet your team face-to-face. That'll make your future remote collaboration so much more efficient and effective. And also think about meeting outside of work. You don't necessarily have to be friends or buddies with your teammates, but do those team building events and have lunch together or go to a happy hour and get to know their personality, because online they'll have a remote persona when they communicate. And again, understanding how people communicate helps you interpret their messages later when you're not face-to-face or sitting in the same room. And find the best frequency to meet. So there's no rule of thumb that will be good for a single team or a single organization. You're going to have to find the best frequency that you need to be face-to-face. For WordPress.com, it was once a year. Other teams might find they have to get together once a month, or it may even be once a week, where you're together in the office at the first part of the week, and then you're able to work remote effectively for the second part of the week. So you need to find that best frequency to meet. The second best practice is break it down. When we think about remote collaboration and how a team interacts with each other, the dynamic is very different than when you're face-to-face, in a single location. The dynamic is very different. And we have found, and again, through our research and observations, we've kind of confirmed that breaking down the collaboration into smaller chunks really helps remote design and remote work in general. So think about the activities, the exercises, the tasks that you have to do, and how you can break them down into small chunks. This will also help keep the focus of the group. So the collaboration effort will be much more focused. When we meet face-to-face, I think there's a lot of assumed improvisation. Because you are face-to-face, you're able to kind of work through a situation together. That dynamic may be missing when you're collaborating remotely. So you'll want to break things down into small steps and have individual components that you sequence and then string together. You chain those together to get through an activity or an exercise. And that's what Doug Powell told us in a recent interview that he conducted. Doug is a principal designer at IBM, and he's head of their education program. And he was telling us how they break down activities into small chunks to help facilitate remote collaboration. And here you see on this slide on the left, you see a mural. So he was using Mural, a visual virtual whiteboard, to kind of break up the activity that they wanted a team to get through. And each one of those colored backgrounds represents a single step in the activity. They were going through some design thinking flows, let's say. And what they were able to do is break things down into what he calls micro time-boxed sections. So think about chunking things down to an activity or a task that you could be done in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and then time box that activity. So if you're on a conference call together, let's say, and you're using Mural as your brainstorming background, as your whiteboard, you can say, okay, everybody take 3 minutes and think of solutions, brainstorm solutions. When that's over, then move to the next exercise and give everybody 5 minutes to do that. And then discuss it and move on to the next exercise. And really chunking things into small groups and then time boxing them really keeps focus of attention. When you are working remotely, people get distracted, they multitask, and time boxing really keeps the focus of the group. And you're able to do longer sessions and more effective sessions if you time box everything. So 3 things you can do is create small steps. Don't think about an hour-long activity or a longer activity. Think about what are the individual steps and conceive of those as chunks in the collaboration. And give detailed instructions. If someone gets lost in a group when you're collaborating remotely, it's harder to bring them back into the group. So you want to make sure that everybody knows exactly what to do. And you need to tell very explicitly what you expect them to do during the activity. So if you time box an exercise, say, write your top 3 ideas in 1 or 2 words on 3 sticky notes on the left, and then group them on the right. Be very explicit what they're supposed to do and what the expected outcome is, and give them examples of what the outcome might look like, so that they have a very clear picture from your instructions on what to do. And then above all, micro time box those activities. Once you've broken them down, given clear instructions, limit everything to 3 minutes or 5 minutes. You can always add more if you need more time. Say, okay, we'll give everybody another 2 minutes. But at least you time box it, and you have that sense of urgency and that focus of attention for that time box period. Okay. Next, be present. And this is kind of a broad category, a best practice that we've identified about showing that you're available when you're remote. Kind of isolation is a problem for one, and the frequency of communication can also diminish when you're remote. So you want to increase the frequency of communication with your colleagues to kind of break that isolation, but also to have the collaboration be a continuous force when you're collaborating remotely. So think about ways that you can be present. There's an interesting study and some interesting research from Thomas Allen, a professor at MIT. It's a couple of decades old, but it's since been reconfirmed and validated. But what he found in his research was that the frequency of communication between colleagues at work decreases rapidly with the distance between those employees, the physical distance. So frequency of communication and distance of separation resembles a power curve, like a curve on this chart, which is called the Allen curve. And I believe there's a Wikipedia article called the Allen curve if you want to read more about his research. But what he found was at about 200 feet away, or at about 70 meters away, the communication frequency drops off to the point where you might as well be remote. It's about on par as being remote. So even if you're in the same office building or on different floors, or you're in different offices on a large campus, you may be actually engaging in remote collaboration with your colleagues. But the danger there is that the frequency of communication also diminishes. So think about ways that you can increase the frequency of communication by being present, being available, showing that you're there, and responding quickly and things like that. And that's what Hano.co did. This is a design agency originally out of Norway, but they also work remotely themselves. So it's a design agency that is largely remote. And they did kind of an experiment working with Mural. They wanted to do a week-long design thinking exercise where they weren't in the same room, but they were still going through a whole series of design thinking activities, brainstorming, coming up with prototypes, and testing them with customers. And here you see a picture of someone, actually interviewing a user, for instance, and doing that remotely. And they did this whole week-long experiment, and they learned a lot of things. And one thing they learned is that you get out of sync very quickly. So what they did were daily check-ins. And I would say these daily check-ins and daily stand-ups actually is a way to show your presence, right? You might think it's not as spontaneous as being in the office, and it's not. So sometimes you have to plan that spontaneity. And that helps your team get on the same page. So 3 things that you can do: hold design stand-ups. We think about technical stand-ups, or stand-ups for developers in agile software development, for instance. Why not a design stand-up where you review each other's designs really quickly, or talk about what each other has done in 15 minutes, and that's all it takes. It could be daily, maybe every other day, but have regular check-ins with your design partners. And also be available. Show that you're online. If you're using Slack, make sure that little green on indicator is there. Same with Skype. Or think about using a tool like Squiggle, which has an always-on webcam. Also respond to your colleagues quickly. So if somebody sends you an email, respond as quickly as you can, because that will increase the flow of communication. So show that you're available and that you're collaborating in a fluid type of way, even when you're remote. And finally, when we talk about being present and you're working across time zones, sometimes that can be challenging, particularly if your days don't overlap. How do you be present? And I think there are ways to have asynchronous collaboration as well too. Of course, using a tool like Mural helps with that, but you can also comment. Have an ongoing discussion online and not synchronously. So really, you need to have effective remote collaboration. You need to confront time zones. I think there's some math involved there too. So get a good time zone converter. And if you Google time zone converter, you'll get a few. I'm using something called World Time Zone Buddy right now. I find that very good for planning meetings across time zones. But I think working across time zones also takes some flexibility as well too. So be flexible to be able to, answer an email later at night after hours, for instance, because that dependency or that information will keep your teammate, 12 time zones away going for their day, which is different than your day. So I wanted to jump into a mural now, and I have some colleagues online, and I just wanted to show how some of these best practices might play out in a mural. So I'm sharing with you now. You should be seeing a mural, and of course, if you're not familiar with Mural, it's a visual workspace that works in your browser, and you can zoom and pan. I'm zoomed out all the way. You can see here they're working on a collaboration effort where they did some personas and empathy maps, and now they're engaged in a brainstorming session around how might we make remote teams feel closer together. So you can see we broadcast their cursors. So Mural broadcasts the teammates' cursors when they're collaborating in a mural, and I can see Mariano and Celeste in there and Larissa in there. And that's one way to show your presence. All right, so just this sense of collaborating together. If you were on a Skype call, for instance, kind of like we're doing here with this webinar with audio and video, and then you have the mural open in the background, it's a great way to kind of show activity and show this availability that I was talking about. And of course, because Mural is a cloud-based application as well too, when someone moves something or adds something, I can see that right away. So I see what Larissa is doing right now. I can see Mariana moving things around. And that's also kind of shows availability and presence as well too. We also have what's called a follow me feature in Mural. So right now I have an independent view of the mural. Everybody has their own view of the mural. But I can choose, for instance, to follow Mariano just by clicking on his avatar down at the bottom. And now I'm not zooming or panning. He's moving my viewport around. And the follow me feature in Mural is a great way to collaborate with people in real time, and then share each other's work and to move kind of in and out of doing heads down work and then presentation, and then heads down and presentation. So if you are time boxing things, the follow me feature is a great way to collaborate. And of course, we have a commenting feature, and we show the archive of what was added to the mural. So if you are working across time zones, you can see what your colleagues in a different time zone added. There's also a chat feature in here as well too. So we've built in a lot of elements into Mural to kind of enhance that, that presence and that sense of working together. It's right into the experience of Mural. So that leads nicely into my fourth best practice recommendation, and that is to work visually. And I think that's really one of the big challenges when we talk about remote work and then remote design. One of the challenges that designers have is working visually across distances. Of course, when we're face-to-face, we can stand up and draw on a whiteboard or use a flip chart and pieces of paper, and we tend to do that in our office spaces, and I think that's good and healthy, and you should continue to do that. But think about how you can be more visual when you're collaborating remotely. Of course, Mural is a tool that supports that directly, and I do recommend that you give it a try if you haven't. It will enhance your remote collaboration greatly. And I think it's really that visual component. So think about working remotely, but still keeping that visual component. And that's what they do at McBeard Media. Kaylee Howell, the creative director there, has been using Mural for several years now with her clients and with her project teams. When they set up a new project on one of the social media campaigns that they do or marketing campaigns they do for large customers like Coke and Sony, one of the first things they do is create a mood board. And they're creating those mood boards in Mural. And you'll see a picture of one, an example that she shared with us on the left there. That they have different aspects of the collaboration of the campaign, around photos and colors and textures. And because in Mural you can add images and you can add videos and you can add links, it's a great place to bring all of that visual information together, right? It's not just about sticky notes and stick drawings, right? It's about how do we get high fidelity things into our collaboration as well too, even when we're working remotely. And that can actually provide a richer experience that you can get offline. In fact, when I was just recently speaking with Kaylee, she said she can't even imagine doing a whiteboard offline these days. The traditional way to do it would be to find all these images, print them out, cut them up, and then stick them on a foam board and walk around the office with this big foam board. And that's good for some use cases. But if you do have a teammate that's not there, you're essentially locking them out of access to that information. So working digitally is not only easier and richer, but it promotes and it allows for that remote design, but still being visual as well too. So 3 things that you can do: use a visual workspace. Try Mural. We have a 30-day free trial at mural.co. And take advantage of digital formats. I actually believe that working digitally can increase the quality of our work. That if we take advantage of the fact that I can work with a higher degree of multimedia, that I can have embed videos and things like that, that I can keep the collaborative and creative momentum going in between face-to-face meetings, that I can archive and duplicate and share my work easier once everything's digitally. I believe that those advantages can actually increase the quality of our work, right? So think about how can I work remotely and digitally, but actually produce better work. And I think there's a lot of advantages to working digitally first. But also use multiple devices. So use extra webcams and iPads and mobile phones and things, and the cameras on those devices to take pictures, to share things in your office with other folks. So make the collaboration a richer experience by using multiple devices as well too. And I think that increases the visual nature of what you're doing. And finally, the 5th best practice that I'd like to share with you is to experiment. That there's no one-size-fits-all recommendations here, that you're going to have to look at your organization, your industry, your team, the personalities in your team, and find the right balance for you. And that really takes some learning. So I think remote design and remote collaboration in general, I think it's a skill that we need to develop a lot more. I think we have, I actually think the tools right now are better than the practices. So we have a long way to go in developing our practices to have effective remote design. Really kind of increase the quality of work and not decrease it. And I think you learn that through experimentation. And that's what we did with Jeff Gotthelf. Mural partnered with Jeff Gotthelf, the author of Lean UX, to take his Lean UX workshop and do it remotely. So we had a 3.5-hour workshop that Jeff led and I moderated, or I facilitated, with participants who had never met each other before and were not co-located. None of us were co-located, and we were able to, in 3.5 hours, get through the first half of his workshop online. We used a teleconferencing software for the audio and video, and then we used Mural for the brainstorming. That was the kind of the platform for collecting all of the information and doing the actual collaborative exercises. His workshop uses a lot of sticky notes when it's offline, in person, and face to face. There's a lot of sticky notes and flip charts, and we were able to recreate that online using Mural. But we learned a lot. We didn't know how that was going to happen the first time we did the experiment. We ran it 3 times, and the first time there were a lot of glitches. So we had to kind of figure out with Jeff's curriculum, with just the people who were involved, how do we best work with them? And by the 3rd time we did this experiment, we kind of had it down. We knew exactly what to expect. We kept the flow of the team going, and we were able to collaborate with a team that was distributed around the world. We have a blog post summarizing these experiments on our blog. That's blog.mural.ly. And again, I'm going to be collecting all of the references and all of the citations that I mentioned during this webinar. They will be available on the blog afterwards, blog.mural.ly, as well as a recording of the event and the slides. So I'll be happy to share these slides with folks as well too. If you check back in a couple hours this evening or tomorrow morning, you'll definitely find a summary of the webinar there. But you can also find recounts and recaps of our experiment on Lean UX, as well as the webinar with Doug Powell I mentioned before, and some other things. So 3 things that you can do. Pilot an all-digital effort. Take a project, or even just a piece of a project, or even just an exercise that you want to do, and force your team to do it all digitally. Do it if you're working from home on Friday or something, wait for that exercise and do it then. And I think what you'll find is you'll kind of stress test the remote culture that team has by doing it all digitally. And it may not go well. You'll definitely learn a lot, and I think that's the big point here is you really need to learn and practice to be effective and do remote design. And it takes a lot of patience and persistence. Sometimes you have stakeholders or external clients who just resist it. So it may not come overnight, and you may have to convince stakeholders and others to join in remote collaboration, or how they can be more effective. It really takes some patience and persistence. And finally, I think kind of to sum up everything I've been saying here is that I think it's kind of up to you. If you're on this webinar, I assume that you're interested in remote designing being more effective. So be the facilitator. Good remote collaboration in general really takes a facilitator, or multiple facilitators for that matter. But it really takes someone to think about, how are we going to break down the activities? How are we going to time box those? How are we going to collaborate so that that everybody is contributing, and that we show availability and that people aren't isolated? How can we structure an in-person meeting at the beginning of our project? How can we work more visually, right? All of those things take a facilitator really to kind of keep that moving, that momentum moving. And in creative disciplines, that's super important to keep the creative momentum moving between face-to-face encounters. So be the facilitator, be that person that keeps the team moving even when they're not co-located. So the best practices, again, that from our research and our observations that we've shared today, number 1, meet in person. Really understand the personality and communication style of each member in your team, so you're able to interpret their messages and interact with them remotely more effectively. Break down the collaboration into individual chunks and sequence those chunks. Make small steps and then time box those. So that you get that focus of attention and you don't lose people's attention. Be present, show your availability, respond quickly. Think about ways that you can overcome isolation and keep the conversation going. Just because you're remote doesn't mean you can't work visually. I think there are lots of ways to do it using multiple devices, taking photos of things. But a tool like Mural really helps that visual communication that's so key to design work. And then finally, experiment and learn how you and your team will work effectively remote, because it is going to be different for each team. So you need to find that out, and that takes some patience and persistence. So I just wanted to wrap up with a few final thoughts, and then I'll bring Mariano back on to answer some of your questions. I think we've moved from work being this place where you punch a time card at 9 o'clock in the morning and you're at work and you're at a physical place to working with information. And really what I like to say is that work is not a place, it's what you accomplish with others. Right, so it's really that team spirit, the willingness of the team is really key in a remote collaboration. That if you have a willing team and they want to communicate with each other, they'll find a way to do that. Right, so the teamwork I think is absolutely key to remote collaboration, not the place. And that's what Dov Seidman was talking about in his article, From the Knowledge Economy to the Human Economy. And he was talking about this transition from hired hands, from manual labor, to knowledge workers, working with your mind. And he says that in the human economy, the most valuable workers will be the hired hearts. So really, again, that passion, that teamwork, that sense of collaboration, I think if the willingness is there, then, remote design or remote collaboration can be done. So thanks everyone for joining. I'd like to ask Mariano to jump back on, and I'm happy to take some questions now.
Hello.
Yeah.
So yes, I have a bunch of them.
Okay.
And then Megan here has been helping me transcribe some of them.
Nice.
So over here we have one from Thomas, who was really proud of being the first to ask. Do you think, and actually I want to ask you one first.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the reason behind the icon on the experiment slide?
Yeah, it's about experimenting with offline and online. So it's about the relationship between digital and kind of face-to-face. So it's really more the first bullet point that I was talking about, pilot an all-digital effort. So it's about experimenting with working remotely, and that very often involves digital.
Okay, got it. Because we
a little far removed. I'll give that to you, but there it is.
All right. So Thomas asked, do you think it's possible to have an effective remote collaboration with only 1 or 2 hour overlap? I guess they have teams, for like West Coast and East Europe or Asia, US. Yeah. What do you think?
Totally. In fact, I did that in my last job, 2013. I was in Germany and I was working with teams in California. So that's 9-hour time difference, which means our days didn't really overlap. And what we did was, I worked later in the evening so that we did have a couple of hours overlap. And I'll tell you right now, those hours will be filled with meetings, because if that's the only time you're available, people will book meetings with you. So I basically had that overlap to do the stand-ups, to do the, let's get on the same page, sync up. And then obviously, before that they had been working, and then after that I continued to work. So we were actually able to, kind of follow the sun. They talk about following the sun. There's advantages to that too. But that 2-hour overlap and those meetings that I had with my colleagues there, super key for getting synced up. And I think that's all that it required. But I also did travel to California, right? So, getting from Germany to California isn't rocket science these days. And I would go there and I would meet them and we would go bowling together. And so I knew what their personalities were, and I was able to interpret their emails and their messages as well too. And then when we weren't sitting together, that 1 or 2 hour overlap that we had was all it took. And that was fine for our team. It might be different for your team.
Cool. Yeah, there was something else I saw, like, pre-booking time on the calendar, right? And for this, not only for the meeting, like the reporting meetings, but actually the generative meetings.
Right.
And assigning time, assigning challenges around the clock. Anyway, this is another one that's interesting because it jumps into another situation where you recommended being together in face-to-face meetings. And if you should use technology support for those meetings, right? And if yes, any hardware recommendation?
Sure. Yeah, I actually do. Ultimately, our motto is to go digital first, to think about, even if you're face-to-face, how you can capture things digitally. I was just talking to a colleague yesterday, a design consultant, who was using Mural, and basically said that, doing an entire brainstorming session in Mural, even though the team was face-to-face. They weren't remote. They were face-to-face doing a brainstorm session. He said it saved them about 2 days of summary work, where you're usually taking a photo of the brainstorming, wall, the flip charts and the sticky notes, and then you transcribe those, and then you create a report. He was able to just reshuffle a few of the notes on a Mural, and he felt it saved him actually a few days, is what he told me just yesterday. So I do think using technology to support face-to-face meetings, it's ultimately where we're headed, I believe. And I know that a lot of people like to work with paper and tactile elements and to draw on real paper. And I think that's still important too. But think about, how do I get that digitally as quick as possible? And that's kind of what I meant about use multiple devices. It's fine to sketch here, on your desk, whether you're face-to-face or remote, but take a picture of it right away so that it's digital, so that you're not digitizing things all the way, at one time at the end. So you want to kind of capture things digital, even if you do them offline, right away, even if you're face-to-face. And the Microsoft Surface Hub is something I recommend. Mariano just pulled up a video of him. So this is Mariano here. He's using a Microsoft Surface Hub. This is an 84-inch screen, 4K touchscreen monitor that is super responsive, and you can interact with Mural. We have an application that runs on this hardware, and you can interact it like you would kind of on a physical whiteboard. You just touch on a note and move it over. You can draw on it. You can add sticky notes and images and all that kind of thing. And because Mural is cloud-based, anybody else around the world who's logged into that Mural can also see what you're doing there as well too. So I think as monitors get larger and thinner and cheaper, and that there will all be touchscreen in the future, I think meeting rooms in the future will all have maybe not a Microsoft Surface Hub, but a touchscreen that you can interact with, and then even for face-to-face meetings, start working digitally right from the very beginning. That might be not going to happen tomorrow, but I do recommend using multiple devices. I think this fits into my multiple device category too.
Yeah, for sure. And nice thing about the version that we're deploying is that it includes sketching also. So it's not just about, again, media, sticky notes, rearrangement of stuff, but we've spent some time, if you can afford to have a Surface Hub, to be an amazing experience. Mm-hmm. And next week we're deploying the app for Surface Pro also in the Windows Store.
Right.
So look forward to that. So Andres asks, how do you manage expectations with people starting to work remotely? So like the newbie.
Right. So the newbie's remote right off the bat. Is that kind of thing, or?
So let's assume that probably, yes, he says yes, but basically, let's assume that Andres is an experienced guy, working remotely, but there's a few guys who are not, and they need to manage expectation.
Yes.
I guess probably like showing them this webinar, but
right. Well, I mean, I think that's where the meet in person comes. I have worked in situations where I never met my counterpart or my teammates, or I've met them later. And Mariano, as you know, that you and I worked together for a couple months before we met face to face. But I still think it's possible to get a sense of the other person's personality, even though you're not face to face. So I think that the personal collaboration is actually a huge part of it. But I think there's more than that here in the question about managing expectations. And I think there's one misconception that I want to speak to, and that is if you're kind of in the office place, let's say you do have a desk in an office and you go there every day, kind of for work, which is, this is a great thing. Yeah, you can work face to face with your colleagues every day. That's great. But then you have a remote employee. Sometimes what you get is a here and a there kind of attitude, that we're here in the office and you're there. And you get kind of almost a second-class citizen. The remote person is a second-class citizen. And the misconception that I want to point out is the fact that everybody in that equation is working remotely. Even if you're in the office and you're working with a remote partner, you're working remotely too. So that's why getting things to digital and thinking about how you're going to collaborate remotely, even if you're in quote unquote in the office, is super important. So I would kind of recommend having an explicit talk about things. First of all, see if you can meet in person. Talk about the tools and the practices that you're going to implement, like daily stand-ups and things like that. But also practice and just have some patience. Try a few things. Say, hey, we're going to try to do this design review with you remotely and see how it works. You're not going to get it right. So take the first few days or the first few weeks to build up some experiments and some practices to figure out what's going to work with that person to set those expectations.
Okay, so Armin has been really active in the questions pane. So let's grab one that relates to like the other way around. He talks about like taking the digital into physical. Anything around that?
Well, Mural does have a download option, which renders a high resolution image of an entire mural. And we do have people that we work with, IDEO, for instance, who print out entire murals. So they do a journey map or a persona exercise and then print those out. And the resolution is good enough to make a poster-sized version of the mural. So you can do that. That requires a big printer or going down to Kinko's or something like that. So it is possible to do that. Another thing that I find people doing is using Mural to recreate brainstorm sessions. So let's say you did an empathy map exercise. On a wall, you were face to face, but you needed to present that to stakeholders. You could actually recreate that in Mural to make it still look like it's a design, a creative exercise, and still kind of open to get that kind of passive involvement from the viewers of that presentation, but then to do it in Mural to kind of make it a digital format, and then take a screenshot of it to drop in a presentation as well too. We have seen people using Mural in different ways to move from digital and then back to offline and vice versa as well too. But I find the more that you work with digital products, kind of like the quote from Kaylee Howell at McBeard. She said she can't even imagine doing a mood board offline. And I think as we start using more and more digital tools, we'll start seeing the benefits of doing design work digitally more and more.
And okay, cool. So we move to like a people's one now. I mean, so this one's around like engagement in time, right? Armin has experienced that. Maybe in the beginning it was all like excitement and we're gonna be rocking this thing, and then throughout the time it started to fade away. So how can we make and checkpoints or what ideas around like keeping momentum really high?
Right. Yeah. And that does highlight kind of a symptom of remote work, and that is attention and energy dissipates really quickly. So you might have people who are then individually passionate about the topic or the project, but then when they're working remote, that collective energy can dissipate, and there's this danger of kind of a cliff, a fall off of that energy. And that was kind of my recommendation around being the facilitator, to keep that momentum going, to kind of spark and poke and prod and get people to move. And I think breaking things down into smaller chunks and time boxing things, even if it's an asynchronous activity, to time box it and say, hey, you guys only have a day to finish this asynchronous exercise, and put it on people's calendars. So sometimes you have to actually schedule and plan the collaboration. I call it planned spontaneity. That's on the one side. On the other side, I think things like rituals. So we talked about the daily design stand-ups, but what other rituals can you build in to the remote collaboration that are kind of a regular part of your practice? And if you look at the agile practices and the agile canon in general, a lot of that, what it does is it ritualizes product development. You have the notion of a stand-up, of a story, of a grooming session, of a retrospective. And when you say these things to anybody who's done agile development, they know exactly what you mean, because there's this ritual around each one of those things. So it's really about making remote work how can you make it a ritual? And I think that the rituals that we bake into our practices go a long way into keeping the momentum going.
I mean, another one there, whenever the team achieved a little milestone, it's gonna be hard to like do all hands celebration all together, right? But figure out ways of doing remote celebrations and maybe taking pictures with different beer shots or whatever. But whatever you used to celebrate, celebrate together remotely.
Yeah, exactly. We gave a webinar with Ruud Jensen from the Event Model Canvas. You can see that webinar on our blog as well too. And what he had and he does this in his workshops, both in person and remote. He has everybody make a paper airplane, right? So we were all in this webinar, and he said, everybody at home make a paper airplane and then launch the airplane. Just a little simple ritual or a little, celebration thing like that can really keep momentum going, both, personally and in terms of the problem and the project that you're working on.
Hey, Jim, I have two questions, but I think that we can blend into one or a large explanation. I mean, Christine asks, what are the characteristics of an excellent remote facilitator, and which soft skills must we develop, right? And related but not related, but maybe you can sneak it in. How many hours do you think is necessary to spend preparing a 1 hour online workshop?
Right. Okay. Yeah, so characteristics of a remote facilitator, some characteristics from offline facilitation. So, good organization skills, being able to stand up and speak and to lead. But remote facilitation is absolutely a key to remote collaboration. And I just did an interview with Rachel Smith. Let me type her name. So, by the way, we're using Mural here to capture these questions. So, Rachel S. Smith, she works at the Grove, and she's actually writing a book, I believe, right now on remote facilitation. I just did an interview with her. It's up on our blog. Again, that's blog.mural.ly. We'll send this information around, but if you go to blog.mural.ly, you can find that interview I did with Rachel Smith, and she talks a lot about remote facilitation as being key, and she talks about a lot of the skills that you need, again, around organization, around kind of keeping that momentum going. So you can't be afraid to kind of jump in and foster those conversations. But there you go. There's Rachel. But I think it's also, she's also got a great TED Talk, by the way, on sketching. But it's also about the ability to take a method or an exercise and chunk it down and be very, very explicit with those instructions, and then to time box that. So really, when I was talking about break it down, that's really a key function of a facilitator. And in terms of the timing, it may take at first, it may take longer to plan an hour session, because you're not just going to have an hour that you're going to improvise. You need to break it down into individual chunks and think through it. You might even need to dress rehearse it as well, too. So the first time that you plan a workshop, it may take well more than an hour for an hour-long workshop to plan that workshop. It might take several hours. But that's the same thing with a presentation. I mean, this is an hour-long webinar, and it took me more than an hour, I'll tell you, to prepare for this webinar. So I think when you kind of think about remote collaboration almost as a presentation, it will take some more time. However, once you start getting a repertoire of activities that then become ritualized, right? Hey, we're going to do the design studio now. Right? Now we have this ritual of a design studio. You have the methods and the instructions down. Then it doesn't take long at all. Right, so I think there's an initial planning and then an ongoing planning thing. But it's for the project and for the quality of work, it's going to take some more effort up front.
Yeah, in that regard, we're working on a template, save as template functionality, so that you'll be able to, again, I mean, right now you need to duplicate murals that you might save on a template room. But in the future, we can mark them. It's going to be much simpler. So you can have a bunch of templates with a set of frameworks and prepare activities much easily. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Maria asks, so after the ideation process, when the actual design creation process starts, I guess that she's saying the prototype building, I think designers could be benefited by a tool like Mural.
Oh, I think there's several ways. One of the zoom effects of Mural is being able to zoom out. And let me just take this mural that we're on, and I can zoom all the way out, and we can see the personas and the empathy maps and the brainstorming session that we were looking at before. and now we're down here doing this Q&A. If you think about things like a sitemap or an application map, you can actually map out a whole digital product or a service workflow, for instance, on a mural, then see it at a high level, but then zoom in to see the details, right, of a screen or an individual interaction. So if you're using like wireframes, for instance, or even mock-ups, you can put them right into the mural. And we did this with our own blog. So we were relaunching the design of the blog using a design agency in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, where Mural has its development office. Mariano was in San Francisco and I was in New York. They would throw up the mock-ups. They would put them up on a mural. So we were able to see kind of the flow and the different screen types. And then because Mural has a commenting function, and I'll just show that really quick right here. So if I right click on this sticky note, I can add a comment here and I can actually ask a question. So I'm going to say, hey, Megan, what do you think? We were actually able to have a conversation on those mock-ups using the commenting function in Mural. Across distance. So it was a way to kind of flatten, I like to say, flatten out what a product might be or an interaction might be, using the multimedia aspect of Mural to map out an application. But also, even for things like usability sessions, so you're doing usability testing, and you want to collect all of the observers of that usability session. You want to collect their feedback. You could use a Mural as a way to do that remotely. So there are definitely lots of ways to integrate Mural in an ongoing way. We're also looking at creating a template for what we call a project dashboard. And this would be a way that you would keep the high-level strategy and vision and roles and responsibilities, but then all the links to all of your websites and prototypes and things. You can maintain all of those on a single mural, and it's a great visual way because very often in our offices we have those on whiteboards, but you can recreate that in a mural. And I see that Megan just responded to my comment here, so looks great. She writes back to me. So you're able to have a conversation here. And that's one of the ways that we find a mural very valuable, to have conversations around design artifacts as you're developing them. Anything else, Mariana? I don't know if you're muted, Mariano, perhaps. I'm not able to hear you at the moment.
I'm muted, sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I was checking how many people we had online, and there's 220 people. So we have 3 minutes until 3 p.m., and then we close it up.
Okay.
Thank you guys for staying, and we'll see if we can sneak in one more question.
Mm-hmm. Let me follow you.
So Kieran asked a technical, like, can we use Mural for designing systems like UML diagrams? We don't have a UML palette, so it's more like low level what you can design in Mural. But we've been asked for like some like icons for UML and for some other type of diagram. So might consider it, but not right now. We want to make it really simple for everybody to be able to just start using this and not have to like feel a technical person to do this. Really radical collaboration, and for radical collaboration to happen, we need to make this as simple as possible for everyone to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have seen development teams using this, Mariano, for story planning and sprint planning. And one thing, again, that zoom factor. What you could do, so you could do a diagram of stakeholders or whatever your UML diagram is. In one part of the mural, plan out a high-level roadmap for stories in another. So I think you could use it to kind of plan, your implementation and have that in an overview all in one place. So there may be advantages to using Mural for that type of work over some of the traditional tools, and it is possible, but it's not baked in like you mentioned.
All right. Yeah, I think that questions are related, but there's one around security. So what about safety standards with Mural? How is data protected? Well, I can answer that one. But basically, again, we've passed a few penetration tests and a few, diligence from large companies. If you're working with a large company, maybe you want to upgrade to an enterprise tier in our software. We have like extra integration with single sign-on servers and some other stuff. So reach out, but we should be. I mean, again, we don't have any complaints, but by people that whose jobs are to find security flaws in software.
Right. So yeah, we work with IBM and we've passed their penetration tests. So we're secure enough for IBM right now, and we have those certificates and things. But it is a cloud-based application, and that's one of the bugs or one of the stress points that you need to test within your organization with all of the tools that you might use for digital collaboration, because you might want to use Dropbox for file sharing and Skype and other things, and they may not allow that, or security might not allow that. So you need to figure all that out, and then what are you going to do to replace that type of thing is in the flow of interactions. So those are the kind of things you need to learn about and figure out how you can still work effectively. And I think it's possible. If you read the book Year Without Pants, they used a blog and IRC chat. So it was very low level technology. It's not the technology that's going to make for effective communication. It's going to be how you're actually working together and the team spirit and all that kind of thing.
All right, everybody.
Yeah.
It's the hour passed, so thank you very much for attending, and please reach out with requests or ideas on webinar topics. We're planning out the next year with some other activities and some other guests also. So let us know who you would like to listen to, and we'll do our best to try to convince them to speak to you all. Yeah. So have a great Christmas, New Year's, and again, hope to see you next year.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Again, check out blog.mural.ly later today or tomorrow morning. You'll find all the references that I mentioned in the webinar, as well as a recording of the webinar, so you can share that with your colleagues. And thanks everyone for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day. That will end the webinar. Thanks.